The Battle of Stalingrad is considered the bloodiest in world history. It lasted 200 days, from July 17, 1942 to February 2, 1943. It was after this massacre that the Germans could no longer recover, and the Red Army began its liberation campaign across Europe. Defending a strategically important city was truly an incredible feat. By 1942, Nazi Germany was at the peak of its power, and Hitler was actually celebrating victory, capturing half of Europe and rapidly moving into the heart of the Soviet Union. However, we should not forget that the city was of great strategic importance. Its capture would give Germany access to Astrakhan and the opportunity to cut off the main regions of the USSR from Caucasian oil. In this case, the entire Transcaucasus would be virtually surrounded, but Stalingrad was a disaster for the Nazis. Pavlov's house. Battles were fought for literally every inch of land, and battles for residential buildings and factory buildings turned into a real hell. Unparalleled in world history in terms of scale and ferocity, the Battle of Stalingrad, which became a turning point in the entire Second World War, ended victoriously on February 2, 1943. But street fighting continued in Stalingrad until the end of the battle on the banks of the Volga. One of the strongholds was the legendary Pavlov's house. Its end wall overlooked the January 9 square. The 42nd Regiment of the 13th Guards Rifle Division, which joined the 62nd Army in September 1942, operated at this line. The house occupied an important place in the defense system of Rodimtsev's guards on the approaches to the Volga. It was a 4-story brick building. However, he had a very important tactical advantage. From there, he controlled the entire surrounding area. It was possible to observe and fire at the part of the city occupied by the enemy by that time, up to 1 kilometer to the west, and even more to the north and south. But the main thing is that from here the paths of a possible German breakthrough to the Volga were visible. It was just a stone's throw away. Intense fighting here continued for more than 2 months. On the night of September 23, a group of the 13th Guards Rifle Division advanced to the house. The detachment managed to occupy the object, knocking out the Germans, but only 4 of our guys survived. Among them is Sergeant Pavlov. He turned out to be the senior rank in the group of survivors. Later, reinforcements led by Afanasiev were sent to Pavlov. By this day, 25 people were fighting for the house, although the Germans believed that almost a whole battalion of Russians was standing there. The situation of Pavlov and other fighters was complicated by the lack of communication with the command, lack of food, water, and ammunition. In addition, civilians who were unable to evacuate in time were hiding in the basement of the building. When the water completely ran out, the soldiers dismantled the heating boiler, draining brown rusty slurry from it into all the available tanks and buckets. They drank it after filtering it through cotton wool and gauze until it turned yellow. The food was wheat mixed with soil, scattered in the surrounding area from bombed mill warehouses. The soldiers collected it at night instead of getting any sleep, but no one despaired or lost their fighting spirit. The German publication Stern, talking about the feat of the garrison of Pavlov's house, noted that the Russians also wore out the Germans with song. The soldiers found an old gramophone and constantly played the same record, which irritated the Nazis, who were already losing faith in themselves, making unsuccessful assault attempts over and over again. Perhaps the fascists would have been given different concerts, but Pavlov only had one record. However, there is another version of this part of the defense. They say that there is a piano in the house, which the defenders of the house used to play in quiet moments. We made our way through walls of corpses. Afanasiev and Pavlov competently built the defense of the building. In addition, after several sleepless nights, trenches and tunnels were dug to neighboring buildings and a mill, where units of the Soviet troops were located. This made it possible to establish supplies, albeit meager ones. Several packs of crackers and canned food were sent to the soldiers, but the issue with the shortage of ammunition was finally resolved. Somehow, the Germans made 2 attempts to attack the house in one day. Moreover, the second time the Nazis approached the house in a deranged state, head-on, without shelter from fire. The Red Army soldiers even decided that their opponents were drunk. They did not know that pharmacological drugs that suppressed the feeling of fear were freely sold in Germany at that time. But the fortress survived again. On October 14, the Nazis launched the Third General Assault on Stalingrad. The 14th Tank Division and 5 fresh assault engineer battalions entered the city. Under the cover of artillery and mortar fire, German infantry came close to the house from 3 sides. The defenders used up all their ammunition, and 6 soldiers were wounded. It seemed that the fall of the House of Pavlov was inevitable, but at that moment Soviet artillery struck from the left bank of the Volga. The German assault groups, not covered by thick brick walls, died from shrapnel and shells. The last stage of the Battle of Stalingrad began. The sides changed places, and now the Germans had to defend themselves. On November 24, Afanasyev, Pavlov, and other fighters left the house and, together with other units, went on a counteroffensive. During the 58 days of defense of Pavlov's house, our losses amounted to 3 people. The losses of the Germans to this day cannot be accurately calculated, but judging by the description of events alone, we can talk about significant casualties among the Nazis. For 2 months, Pavlov's soldiers managed to resist the merciless attacks of the 295th Wehrmacht Infantry Division. From the roof, they knocked out German tanks with an anti-tank self-loading rifle. They managed to hit the less protected parts of the armored vehicles. But the elevation angle of the guns of the German tanks was not enough to shoot at the roof of the house, notes the author of the text, continuing. The corpses of German soldiers were lying everywhere, and it was impossible to remove them because of the Russian snipers. At night, the Russians crawled out of the house and dragged the corpses from the entrances and windows, so that tomorrow they would again have open space in front of them. Eyewitnesses said that, having gone on the offensive, Soviet units had to literally rake and make their way through the walls of the corpses of German soldiers. On February 2, the last large fascist groups, including General Paulus, will surrender. The decline of Hitler's Germany will begin. Even during the war, Pavlov's house was considered a legend, and it was it that became the first restored building in Stalingrad. Today, only part of the end wall remains of that building. On May 4, 1985, it was turned into a memorial, the inscription on which reads, "In this house, feats of arms and labor merged together."